All right, this video is to talk about depth of field, aperture, and how both aperture and focal length will control our depth of field in our photographs. The first thing I want to start off with here is getting you thinking that shutter speeds and aperture are kind of a language that we can use to set our exposure on our cameras. And that language is usable across any camera. So it doesn't matter if it's a film camera or a mirrorless digital camera or a DSLR camera. We have a lot of options here. So these are some of the cameras that I enjoy making photographs with. And I just want to kind of go through them real quick here so you can check them out a little bit. We've got a Fuji X Pro 2 here, kind of a rangefinder camera, 24 megapixels, something like that, 22 megapixels, I think, excuse me. Nikon FE, little film camera. Nikon D3, digital camera, use that for sports and that kind of thing. 4x5 camera. On the 4x5, the aperture and the shutter speed are controlled there on the lens. On this Nikon, the aperture is controlled on the lens. The shutter speed is set on the top there. The Nikon digital, everything's controlled in the body, and the body and the lens communicate. Same thing with the Fuji. With the Phase 1 camera back here, with an autofocus Phase 1 lens, everything's controlled through the body, and the lens and body communicate stuff to each other and control the aperture that way. And the shutter on this camera here, the shutter is actually located inside the lens. Same thing on the Hasselblad film camera here and on the 4x5. Everything is contained right there in the lens. So the three cameras in the back there have what's called a leaf shutter built into the lens, and the cameras in the front here have a focal plane shutter. That focal plane is just sitting right in front of the sensor or the film plane. And the Phase 1 camera back there actually has both shutters in it, and you can choose which one you use. But let's talk a little bit more about aperture. So our aperture is going to be controlled in the lens, and it's going to control how much light comes in and out of the camera. So when we look through a lens, we're going to typically be looking wide open through that lens there. Let's see if I can adjust that focus to get us a little more in there. There we go. Notice how the image here through this lens is upside down and backwards. So there's our Hasselblad there, upside down and backwards. So this lens is wide open right now. So it's got an aperture setting of 1.8. This is an 85 millimeter 1.8 Nikon manual focus lens. And as we stop the lens down with this ring right here, go like this. Notice how the numbers go from smaller to bigger, and as the number gets bigger, the aperture gets smaller. And as the aperture gets smaller, our depth of field will increase. The amount of light entering the camera will decrease. Thus, we'll need a longer shutter speed to make an exposure of the same equivalent amount of time. Every time I'm clicking this, I'm doubling the amount of light coming into the camera. So here we are at 2.8, right? 2.8, and so when I go to 4, half as much light just entered the camera. 5.6, half as much as f.4 or f4, and then f8, kind of middle of the road there, you can see. That's letting in half as much as 5.6. And then going in the opposite direction, I'm doubling that and letting in more light. Now that's going to change our depth of field and how much of our image is in focus and out of focus. Another thing that'll change depth of field is how far away we are focused to something compared to the background. And these videos here give a great example of that. Right now I'm focused on the lens, right? And you can notice that the background in the image back there is out of focus and blurry. And that's because this is really, really close to the camera, okay? But as I move this away and reset my focus, now here I'm focused farther away, and everything in that image is in focus because the relative distance to those objects to each other and then to the camera is about the same there. In our next video, we're going to look at different ways that that aperture is shown on a camera, and then in our following video we'll look at how it controls depth of field.